Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Rangers review. Myself, Joshua Barrie, and Stevie Clifford here. Rangers drop more points. Rangers have a damaging evening, not just in the context of the Premiership season, but I think in the context of Philippe Clement's story at Rangers over the last couple of months in particular. 2-1 defeat away at St Mirren sees Rangers fail to close a gap that they had marginally at the top of the table last week. They went behind after conceding a penalty kick half an hour into the game, equalised with substitute Danilo around about the hour mark, but conceded a Boyd Munn's goal in extra time, 98 plus 3, to ensure that they wouldn't even take a point back to Glasgow. We're going to get into the kind of immediate thoughts just now with the game about, 20 minutes in the rear view mirror before tomorrow's morning briefing. But Stevie, I'll come to you first and foremost. I thought, just to give a brief summary, that Chris and I spoke before the game, and rotation. Listen, rotation is easy to speak in hindsight. Rotation was going to have to come at some point. Rangers have, I think, 11 games before the end of January. I heard on commentary, but I thought that was an example of the fact that Rangers' upturn that we've seen has been, really driven by individuals, and a couple of those individuals were taken out of the team tonight, and that largely wrote off the first half for Rangers. They got back into it, and they did respond after the break, but too many elements of that performance away from home had a familiar sense of the type of Rangers performance we've watched that's lost them too many points by December. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
Yeah, but the first thing I would ask is anybody truly surprised by Rangers this evening? And the answer is no. We've had 8 away games, 7 goals, negative goal difference, 4 defeats. Rangers are a toss of the coin to see which team turns up under this management, I'm afraid, if we're brutally honest. And we've given them praise in the last couple of weeks because there was a slight upturn in attitude. But today he reverted back to what we'd been doing before, and it's no surprise suddenly that we find ourselves with the same outcome. That first half was a carbon copy of many first halves, Joshua, that we've seen this season. And the truth is that Rangers play in spells in games because we're not good enough to dominate teams properly where we should. Yeah, we've got a lot of possession, but we don't hurt teams. And that front four, I would put into that. He didn't do anything in the first half, and I've got absolutely no idea why. He almost stumbled onto something that worked, Joshua, and he reverted back to old type today, and Danilo being up there. Are we really sure that Danilo's the answer or that he's brilliant or anything? I'm not sure we are, but he certainly adds something to this team because he plays in between the posts. And, there was absolutely nothing up there, and it allows your man to drift in and influence the game and stuff like that. And it just didn't work today. And it shouldn't have been a surprise because we've tried it so many times. And it's just, do you know what? The summary of the game is it's a frustration because we've seen this before. We really have. This, we've managed this season to get outthought by Stephen Robinson, Jim Goodwin, Stephen Naismith, who ended up getting sacked. The list of managers that has managed to counteract what we try and do as a team is endless, and it's not good enough. And everybody knows my feelings are quite clear by now, but we're now 12 points clear on Boxing Day, and it's 12 points behind, rather, I would say. We're clinging on to having just got back into second place, Joshua. It's about time that somebody said that this isn't good enough for this football club. Not by a long shot. We rely on individuals and moments during game. There's no style. There's no clear indication of what we're trying to do, and it's just not good enough. This is all. I'm sorry, but this game tonight's entirely predictable.
Yeah, the first half stats, I'll read them out to you, Stevie, because they don't make for good reading. Rangers, their expected goals by halftime was 0.15. They'd only had one shot inside the opposition box, five or six attempted from outside the opposition box. Improved after the break, 1.35 expected goals, 15 shots attempted, 4 on target. I think about 8 or 9 inside the box. But the reason I'm highlighting that is that it felt like Rangers kind of wasted that first half. And they obviously conceded the penalty, and we'll get into the defence. We'll obviously get into it in more detail tomorrow. But I guess the question I put back to you as well, Stevie, is how much is tonight about individuals and and players taking responsibility as well, Clement needs to be able to rotate and change things. And listen, had Raskin started that game and he'd been booked 15 minutes in, there'd have been criticism for that. I think the decision to not play that front four that has worked up top together is a little bit more confusing because Danilo made a marked difference. I think it's harsh that he's the one who was to come out of that front four tonight. Jack Butland makes a bad error. Dujon Sterling makes an error for the last goal, but I think you'd also say that Sterling had covered Proper and a couple of other players on a number of occasions as well. So how much do you put it down to individuals? Because Nico Raskin made a big impact, I thought, after the break. Clement should be able to rotate. But this question of like team selection and the unpredictability of the team that Clement is going to select has come up time and time again. And tonight, does that really put it into focus, or do you think that responsibility needs to go on individual performances in that first half as well?
Well, it goes to both, Joshua. You cannot, and I'm with you, right? First of all, the Raskin thing, I completely understand, right? Completely understand it. And whether I agree with it or not is a different thing, but I understand it. Somebody asked me, a couple of weeks ago, who's Rangers' most vital player at the moment? And I said it's Nico Raskin because purely the tempo and the drive in midfield. You've seen it actually when he got back to block Robin Proper's mistake, what he's like in covering and things like that. So I understand why, and you could tell, and it would really help if Diamandi would stop picking up cautions in the middle of the park because he's, I think, 9 bookings this season. It's far too many. He gets himself in a position where he can't influence the midfield for tackling and things like that, Joshua, which is particularly difficult. It means that Raskin's left with a whole lot more to do. But I understand the Barron thing. The thing with Connor Barron is that he doesn't play with the same intensity. However, Connor Barron's trying to hit a front four, which is musical statues at times. And we've seen this before because we have sat and discussed this countless times. And with you, that is more of an issue for me. The taking out of Danilo. Eagleman naturally goes left anyway, so there's no focus up top. Bayrami and Hadji are not finding anywhere near enough of the ball to influence the game. Czerny, the amount of times Czerny got it on the right-hand side today and he was static because he's looking up and there's absolutely nothing to hit. There's nobody to play off of. How many times does Czerny play 1-2s off Danilo? Because he's the only one that stands and actually offers somebody to play the ball into and stuff. You take Danilo or a 9 out of that team, and Danilo, by the way, is the only 9 because Hamza Gaman drifts wide and Dessers can't hold the ball up. So that's the issue we have. And you lose that from the whole first half. We get nothing there. And it's no surprise that we lose silly goals because we don't defend well enough anyway. Yeah. And they do come down to individual errors, but there's a lot, there's a lot of errors in both goals. Not only Jack Butland in the first goal, but Jeffty's too slow in getting up. Robin Proper's out of position in the line. There's a whole lot of in each goal, Joshua. I'm sure you'll come to them, but it's just, I find it hard to rationally decipher it because it's so frustrating because we've seen this so many times that it frustrates me to sit and go through it all when ideally we could just play a podcast from a couple of months ago, which is the exact same story.
Yeah, I tweeted, and I'm reading this out because I know I'll fumble my words if I don't read it, but it's easy to speak about team selection in hindsight, but is it fair to say Rangers haven't played well enough domestically the last couple of weeks aside to change what's worked with Danilo and Eggman? And that's the kind of catch-22 I think you have tonight, Stevie, where, as we've just said, it's so easy to come on after a game and say, oh, you got your team selection wrong, and Clement has to change within those 11 games. He can't make no alterations whatsoever because no team will do that, and Rangers have a really substantial fixture list coming up. However, I think when you look at, maybe you take one of Raskin and Danilo out and instead of both, and are you looking at this game tonight and thinking that while it's one game at a time, you're arguably looking too far ahead down the line and not addressing what's in front of you? All these questions will obviously be discussed in the aftermath, but definitely Raskin and Danilo. I agree with what you say, because Barron started the season well, and it's not to pick on him individually because it's difficult to come back into a team when you've maybe not played that position in a number of weeks. But I thought Raskin, just the tempo is the word, the speed at which he plays, the speed at which he wins the ball back, just helped Rangers to actually sustain pressure at the start of that second half. They obviously wouldn't get that second goal. But let's talk about both of the goals, Stevie, because the first goal came after Liam Balogun had went off injured, and I guess that's another negative tonight for Clement. Balogun, who isn't getting any younger, and Rangers have had to rely on him extensively at the centre of defence. Went down clutching looked like his calf or his Achilles. He managed to still clear the ball when he looked like he was injured running back through on goal. And because of that, I don't know if it was a result of that the back four was slightly, the communication wasn't there or for whatever reason. But if you look at the lead up to how Rangers concede that penalty, and of course Butland needs to, I think, take quite a lot of the criticism for that incident as well, because he's the one who ultimately gives a penalty away. But as you say, it's not even in a diagonal line. It's kind of one up, one down. And that comes from Rangers pushing forward. What comes to mind for me, Stevie, is something that we've spoke about, and we actually spoke about it, I think, after the game against Dundee at the weekend, that Rangers play too many long balls, I think. And sometimes that's the nature of this style of football, is if you are going to go direct, and if the game is going to go end to end, when you can't sustain pressure like they did at the start of the second half, then you do maybe leave the game open to these type of variables. And it was just a bit of a freak goal, but I don't think it's there is some a pattern as to how Rangers actually concede that opportunity in the first place.
Yeah, but it's a looped clearance which catches us out, which we've seen before, which has cost us. This isn't something new. Jeffy is slow in getting up. He's done that before. And Robin Proper is out of position and then no speed to get back. I mean, what Jack's doing is a complete mistake from him. Jack Butland wasn't good today. Arguably, Jack Butland hasn't been good in situations for quite a wee while. That's another argument. But he shouldn't come for it. He shouldn't come because he's out wide, and you would imagine that unless he's whipping in an unbelievable finish, Jack's got a good chance of saving that. He didn't. If you remember Butland, it was actually very similar to one that Kyogo had in the cup final, and I think Butland just stood in his line and caught it. So it was very, very similar positionally and everything else. It was Proper again that got caught out by that. And Jack Butland only needed to do that. It takes a spectacular finish to score from them. I don't know why he's done that. But it's, as you said, as I pointed out, the line's wrong. We're all over the place in terms of shape-wise and things like that. And it's just, look, it's just a cheap goal. We're handing them out like Smarties this season, and there's another one. So it is what it is. I mean, does Leon Balogun stop that? Maybe not. Does he get back and make Jack Butland's job more urgent than he has to come out and make that mistake? Then probably he does, but it's just a really bad goal, Joshua. We can't hide that. It's a mistake by Butland. It's a mistake by Proper. It's a mistake by Jeffy. There's a whole load of mistakes in there that lead to the penalty decision. So
I agree with you. I don't think like that's listen. Balogun's got pace. And one of the issues, I think, when Proper came on, he's made a couple of errors. He obviously struggled against him earlier in the season. I think one of the issues Rangers had was that Sterling was having to go and then cover on. Obviously, they changed sides. Sterling was having to go and cover on the other side of defence as well. And it was just that misorganisation that cost Rangers in that moment. And the rest of the first half, I guess, it felt to me like a performance whereby, especially when St Mirren score that goal, they're comfortable sitting in there in a good run of form. I think it was 5 wins from their last 8 going into that fixture. They're going to deal with crosses going into the box every day of the week. But there's a big difference in the type of crosses and the type of areas Rangers are attacking at the start of the second half compared to the end of the first half. The end of the first half, they don't really have anyone in the box because, as you say, I think Egerman's often drifting wide. Barrie didn't have a good game. Chris and I spoke a little bit about him pre-match. And that was a first half performance that we've seen before. What was the stat you read, Stevie, with the number of goals away from home? Because am I right in saying that Ross County is the only time Rangers have scored more than once away from home in
it's
in the league?
7 goals in 8 away games, and 3 of them came at Ross County. 3 of them came at Ross County when it was Egerman, Danilo and Tierney. So I think Hadley was behind them as well, causing kind of mischief and that worked, occupied, and Danilo stays between the goalposts, which changes dramatically. Tierney's got somebody to play off, which he does quite a lot. And I just, I don't understand. We almost stumbled onto it, and then he's came away with it, and we can't be surprised when we come away from a formation or a selection that's working to suddenly decide that we're back to what we've seen before. That in the first half, you could say all these things that we've used to describe them, Joshua: passive, slow, boring to watch, predictable to watch. It was all there in the first half, and it's what we've seen countless times.
I think that's why, because I thought that, again, Chris and I referenced this post pre-match TV, but I thought that Rami would, if you're asking me before the game and you're looking at what Rangers are going to do in the second and you're thinking of team selection ahead to then, and obviously Rangers are, that's why Raskin doesn't play, then I think Rami would have started because of the midfield setup last time, because I don't think that Clement would start with Danilo necessarily on McGregor out of possession. So that, again, maybe reinforces the fact that, okay, play Danilo and Igaman in these next two games together before you start one of them against Celtic, whether it be Igaman or whether it be Danilo, and you start one of them against Celtic on the second, and then maybe not both of them are fresh, but then one comes from the bench, one starts the game. That change at the break, Danilo coming on, Raskin coming on as well, did spark an upturn for Rangers, and they felt in the ascendancy. They score a goal. Don't know if we can call it a set piece goal, but it was from the second or third phase from a corner. And as you're referencing there, the fact that Rangers had Danilo between the posts, they were able to, I think, play higher up the pitch because Raskin was helping them to sustain that pressure. Tavernier was in the box. Instead of crossing to no one, Rangers were crossing to 3 or 4. And do you think it kind of just dropped off just after that goal? Because it felt as though the momentum was all with Rangers, didn't it? And then when they scored the goal, while it wasn't quite as dramatic as saying it dropped right back off, it felt as though Rangers' intensity dropped off the game a little bit, and it just, the minutes started to get away from them until St Mirren eventually win the game in extra time.
Yeah, and this is what I mean about Rangers not being able to sustain periods of pressure. We play in pockets of the game, Joshua.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's too many times that you and I have sat and went over games and said we were not effective in either half. You can, pick whatever one, because we don't. And then they have really good spells during games, which they're capable of, but they don't then go and really insert their dominance onto it. And I'm like you, very much so. When they scored, they dropped off.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they just thought there wasn't that need for the urgency, when to me there is a need for the urgency. You drop off when you're 3-1 up. You don't drop off when it's 1-1, and you allow the other team then to get in, regroup, especially after a goal scored. We didn't pressurize enough. We didn't create enough, and it just, we got to the point where we almost stopped getting it into the right areas. We were overloading quite well on the right-hand side. Czerny was drifting in, and then all that stopped, and we just kind of became passive again, and it was just really frustrating, because we went from a team that were completely in the ascendancy, only one going to win it, to being a team that looked like, not that we were happy to draw the game, but that we were happy to take our time and find the winner. And it lacked that killer urgency, which we should have.
Yeah, but I think Stevie, if that start to the second half is a start to the first half, then you can play it like that. If Rangers start the game with that intensity, which I don't think we've seen them do that often, and then you maybe take the foot off the gas a little bit. But when you are chasing the game, I don't think that I agree with you. I don't think they. I think they played with the fear that they wouldn't get the result for that 15-20 minutes. They got back into the game, and they got back into the game deservedly so, but then weren't able to quite sustain that thereafter. That's kind of, I'm conscious we've not got too many comments, so we all tried to get through a few. James says, not good enough. We have some good games, but we're not consistent, and that probably sums it up pretty well. Comment here saying this lone striker thing Clement keeps trying just has to stop. Didn't work with Dessers and doesn't work with Igaman, CGM55. Why isn't Cortez getting minutes? If he isn't fit enough, he shouldn't be on the bench. Yeah, that's a confusing one, Stevie, isn't it? Because he's been back in full training for a few weeks now, and obviously Rangers are trying to manage him back gently because of the story of his time at Ibrox so far. But I thought that game was really crying out for a winger, because Czerny, he's not really a winger, is he? He wants to, because he doesn't. It depends on your interpretation of it, but he doesn't want to spend time out wide. He wants to move inside. Doesn't really want to drive to the touchline. I thought the final ball of both Chefty and Ridvan was really poor on the left. It felt like a game to me where you needed that winger from the bench, and I guess that's a very valid question. Why is Cortez on that bench if he's not getting minutes? And if he is fit enough for minutes, then why is he not getting thrown into a game that Rangers need to win?
Yeah, I made this comment, I think, on this show with Derek after the B game last week, which Johnny and I were at, and I said in that Cortez is 4 to 6 weeks away from playing in this first team. Joshua, he's miles away, and if you consider the actual game time he's had and things like that, then I think he's only had 9 or 10 games in the whole of the calendar year.
Yeah.
So he's nowhere near fitness. But I'm with you. Like, why is he on the bench if there's no chance of him playing and coming on? But I don't think a game today is one that he would ever have been playing in anyway, to be quite honest, with the pitch being the way it was. But it's just, I think we're clutching at straws if we think that Cortez is going to fix anything, or Cortez is the answer to what this. If we're going to be completely honest, this isn't a surprise tonight, because this is the level of this team. They will have a few good games. They will get good moments in games, but they're not coached well enough, and they're not good enough to be winning the majority of the games in this league that they should. And that's the biggest problem. Next week, we're staring down the barrel of being 15 points behind, plus potentially more if we don't win at the weekend. And that's never good enough. We need to have a serious discussion about what our expectancy levels are this season. If it's just to finish second and not mind how, these performances, then this will happen every 2 or 3 games. But we aren't set up well enough. We aren't coached well enough. The players aren't responding. They play as individuals, and we rely on that individual moments to create things. There's no substantial good performances throughout, and it's just it's so frustrating to watch. And I'll give them credit. Over the last couple of weeks, they've deserved that. But then we revert completely back to type when selections and that aren't right. And I just find myself going, at what point do you say enough's enough? Because I'm getting a bit towards that. Something needs to substantially change, either with how they're setting up and how they're going about things. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going in this pattern of not winning substantially enough where we should.
Yeah, I guess that's the dilemma that Rangers have had, and you always have when you're backing a manager, when you know you're probably not going to win now, is that what does progress look like? Who defines and determines progress? It comes into the conversation that we've had before and we won't have now about the need for things like a sporting director and a structure that means Rangers aren't so reliant on managers to rebuild things, which they have been for 2 successive managers. And obviously these discussions will come up when defeats like this happen, because, as you rightly say, Stevie, I think it puts into context where Rangers are, because a few weeks ago, even after the cup final defeat on penalties, your penalty kicks away there from the narrative being very different, from Clement having totally changed the mood. And that would have been the reality had Rangers won on penalty kicks at Hampden, but they didn't. Dundee at the weekend, there was mixed opinions, I think, about that performance. I kind of thought that it wasn't a great performance, although the chance creation was pretty good. A lot of that was down to a couple of big moments in extra time. So do you feel, Stevie, that we're kind of back to that conversation of, before the Rangers went away to Ross County and we're at home to Kilmarnock, and they seem to have found that domestic template? Do you feel we're back to those type of conversations about what does progress look like, and is it happening? Because, as you say, I guess the confusing point off the back of that is, with all the caveats of selection and game load, why change from that template that you had found to catalyse those wins against Kilmarnock and Ross County? Do you think we're back at that place where we're just kind of having the same old conversations about performances that aren't getting much better? Do you think this is an isolated game that's different if Danilo and Raskin start? How do you kind of judge it overall?
I think whether we like it or not, we're back there, because we were only ever going to be, one result away. And people were getting, a lot was said after the weekend, after we beat Dundee and things like that, about if we can do this, if we can do that. My attitude has always been, just take it a game at a time. And that's changed recently because of the run we went on. So it's kind of manoeuvred itself to being right. Let's try and sustain the form and sustain the performance level. That's all I really wanted. I'm not looking at anything else. I'm not looking at tables or anything else like that, because I always knew that this team is fragile, in that a performance like tonight or a result like tonight was always just round the corner. And that's the biggest issue for me is that's where we are. And it's just, look, whether you like it or not, or I like it or not, or Rangers fans in general like it or not, if we find ourselves in an even worse position next week, people are going to ask those questions of progress and what it looks like and where this manager is. And they're going to ask for this manager then, if you're not going to make that change, which is a hugely different discussion, then going back in January. But what does that look like? So, there's a lot of really difficult questions at this moment in time, Joshua. But one thing's for certain, and just how I feel about it, is we can't keep seeing the same things repeatedly happening in selection and performance and setup, and then be surprised at results like tonight, because it's always going to come across. It's always going to be that way when you do the same thing. And, the away form doesn't. 7 goals in 8 games, 3 of them being up at Dingwall. Mate, I mean, at some point you've got to put your hands up and say, right, this isn't working. So what's your next step? And whether we like it or not, that chain of discussion is going to be prominent in every single Rangers fan conversations in this next week or two.
Yeah, 7 goals in 8 games, or 8 and 7. I can't remember which one it was, but both I think paint a picture of what Rangers' form has generally been like on the road. Listen, we'll be back in the morning, so we're going to leave it there. You'll soon be able to watch Philippe Clement's full reaction on the YouTube channel and read it on the website as well. Recap, if you have not been watching, is that Rangers have dropped more points. Another defeat, another damaging night for them in the Scottish Premiership. 2-1 defeat away at St Mirren on Boxing Day, with lots more questions, as has tended to be the theme of the season. We'll leave it there. Thank you to Stevie for joining me. Thank you to all of you for watching, and we'll speak to you in the morning. Bye.